I don't want to finish this image just because you won't continuously learn if I do. What I want you to do right now is continuously learn. So let's open another image that would be a challenge, and we'll look at one other part of the idea. Just going to do a lens correction on this. Okay, and maybe make the highlights a little darker, clarity up. Okay, let's open this image. I use this image a lot when I do teach retouching because it's one that if you mess up on it, it can really be obvious. When you go to any of these retouching tools and you try to copy from an area, usually you can just option click on one spot, move over to another, and you see a preview within your brush, and you try to get it to line up. Get it to line up if it's specific detail like that, click and drag like this, and we can apply it. See the window starting to come in though because I'm going too far, so I might have to choose undo and do a little bit there from somewhere else. But that's just straightforward copying. Sometimes you need to get creative. So let me show you a more creative retouch after I do this little portion. See how I'm getting too much in because I started copying from the edge of the tree again. But let me show you how I could just copy from the other side of the building. If I copy from the other side of the building, we're going to run into some issues because we should have, like if I wanted to copy, let's say this portion right here to use to replace the top of the tree over here, I'd need to reflect it, wouldn't I? Flip it over. Now I could do that using my selection tool. I could select this whole side of the building. I could copy it. Copy merged is grayed out because we don't have any layers. If we add a layer, it will be available. Choose paste. And then I can use my move tool and just move it over. I can go over here and say I want to flip it horizontally, move it over further, and if I want to see how it's going to line up with what's underneath, because right now it's hard to see, I could lower the opacity. The opacity will allow me to see through the layer to what's underneath it. What's underneath it is the original image. So if I click on the word opacity at the top of my layers panel and I bring it down, I can start to see underneath just a little bit. And I can move this around and see if it lines up. And it looks to me like I'm going to need to rotate it and do some other things. So I can come in here and choose Edit. You remember that choice called Free Transform? That's what allows you to rotate. And I could rotate it. And I can click within it and move it up. Right now it's just getting this little part to line up. Like that. If I turn this off and on now, can you see how it's somewhat lining up as far as that edge goes? I'm not trying to get the full bottom to line up, but I'm trying to get some of this to line up. Looks like I still need to fix a little bit on the left side though, because it's not lining up with the rest of the building. You see it tilts as I bring it in and out. Well, when I come up to that same thing called Free Transform, just below it are a few other choices. Some of them are useful. Well, all of them are useful. Some of them would be useful in this particular case. One of them is called Distort. What Distort does is it gives me these handles, but I can move each handle independently where I can bend the image like this. So I sometimes need to do that, to just stretch this up to make it a little taller to match exactly where that tower would be. I was looking right in this area to try to get it to line up. And then I might just move this a little bit, keep that one edge. I'm looking right now right here to see if that edge lines up. And then move this again to make sure this stays. And when I'm done, I press Return or Enter. So now if I look at this, I'll bring my opacity up, and I'll just turn this off and on, and watch the two areas I was looking at, which was right here and right here. And let's see if I'm anywhere close to keeping them lined up. Not overly bad compared to what we had before, which was quite a bit off. Then I could either use the eraser with a soft edge brush, or if I need to bring some areas back, I can use a layer mask. Layer mask, just like we did with compositing, you create a new layer. I end up grabbing a soft edge brush. Keep the tower from the original, and at least maybe up to here, but then we got that tree coming in, so I need to bring some of this back. I hit X to paint with white, that means bring things back. Get that to blend in, but up here where the sky is, I'll need to at least blend it. I should have copied more of that image so I could use white sky up there. And down here at the bottom, wherever it stops lining up is where I'd have to stop here, so. For now, I'm going to come in and try to let it use this vertical part. Use everything across here. Oop, got the tree trunk, but. And that part I would retouch out manually. Then I can come up here to the corner. And there I can use something like content-aware fill to have it deal with that. Content-aware fill, though, doesn't always like working on empty layers. So here, if I try it on an empty layer, fill, content-aware. Let's see if it complains. Yes. There was a trick, though, and that is if you held down the Option key and you said you wanted to merge the visible layers, it merged a copy of those visible layers onto there, and then it will work. I can then select the opposite and hit delete, because I only wanted that one little chunk in that layer. And now we have those two pieces. I'd have to retouch the bottom, that type of thing. But it gives you some ideas. But I want to show you then, how could I do that without copying and pasting like that? How could I do that actually using my normal retouching tools? Because you can. Let's say I wanted to copy from right here. Usually you Option click to copy from somewhere. And I want to apply it over here. Well, the problem is I would need to flip it horizontally in order to get that to happen. In order to be able to flip it horizontally when you're using a retouching tool like this one, you have to do the following. There's something called the Clone Source panel. Look at what it has available. In here, this is the width and height of whatever it is I'm copying. I can scale it up or down by typing in a number there. Like type in 90%, and now it'll copy, but when it puts it in, it'll put it in at 90% of its original size, if I put the number 90 in there. This is an angle setting. If I wanted to rotate something, I type in a number there, and it will rotate before it applies it. And there are little icons here, this one, and if I hover over it, it'll tell me what they mean. That's going to flip it horizontally right there. So I'll click there, and now if I look at the preview that I get in my brush, can you tell that it's been flipped? I'll make my brush larger here. You see it's been flipped? But if I look at it, it looks to me like it's at the wrong angle. Doesn't it look like it's going upward as it goes towards the right? So let's see how I'd be able to rotate it. Over here we have rotation. That's what this number is. What I usually do is I just click on the field to make it active, and then I move my mouse on my image so I can see, and I'll use the up and down arrow keys. The up and down arrow keys will take the number that I clicked on and increase it or decrease it. So, could you guys see it was moving? I'm not sure if you could or not, but what happens is if you use just the arrow keys, it changes it in 0.1, like a decimal is what it's changing. And if you want to do it a greater amount, you can hold Shift. Shift is like turbo. It means change it a bigger amount. So just stare at the circle where my brush is here, and I'll increase it just so you can see it rotate in there. Can you see it rotating? And so I can sit there and just watch. If I hold Shift, that's when I get it to do it a lot. And then when I get really close to what I need, I let go of Shift, and now it's doing it a tiny amount. Then what I do is I click when I think it's lining up just right. And then, this is weird, click and then choose undo. What happens is I clicked when I had a huge brush so I could see how it would line up with a lot of different things in the image. I clicked to establish that this is where I'm going to put it. But then I chose undo to say I didn't want to put that big of a thing in there. And what happens is when I clicked, it locked it in, meaning it remembered where I was going to put it. Do you notice that it's not moving around anymore? Instead, the little piece I was going to put in, I still see in there. I can get a smaller brush now. Get a smaller brush, and I can come in and just start painting that in. So I don't know if it made sense when I said I clicked and then I chose undo, but what happened is, let's say I'm going to copy, just to make it straightforward, I'm going to copy from the neon sign. Okay. And let's say I was going to, if I clear this stuff out, and I'd want to put the neon sign so that it looks like it's over here instead on this ledge. Well, if I have a brush the size that I might actually want to use at the time I'm applying it, it's hard to tell when it lines up. But if I get a huge brush, I can see where the base of the sign was, and I can move it around and say, oh, right about there would make it look like it's on that ledge. And what I can do is just click the mouse to lock it in and say, yep, that's where I'm going to put it. But I didn't want to put that big chunk in there, so I choose undo. And when I choose undo, it still remembered that I clicked there. It locked in that that's where the end result is going to go. But now I can get a small brush and actually go to put it in, so I can be working on just the little areas that I needed. But the big brush was useful to see how it lined up with all the surroundings. I'm not saying we need to have a sign over there. So this thing called the clone source, what I do with it is, there's a whole bunch you can do, and that's beyond a 101 class when it comes to everything it can do. But the main thing that I find to be useful is here for rotating, because oftentimes I need a copy from like the edge of a cliff and apply it over to this other part of the edge of the cliff, but it just needs to be rotated slightly to line up, and that's where you're able to do so. You can also scale with these, and with those as well, you can click on it, and if you tell it you want to copy from one thing, and you see the preview in your brush, I just click on the number and then use the up and down arrow keys. And you see it getting smaller or getting bigger. I'm holding shift right now because it gives you turbo. And then I let go of shift to do it small amounts. And I can get it sized just right. What could that be used for? Well, what if I need to copy an eyeball off one side of somebody's face, flip it, and put it on the other side of somebody's face? But that other side's a little further away from the camera or something, or their eye's supposed to be a different size. Well, I can scale it there. I could rotate it slightly, all that kind of stuff. I usually click on the numbers, use the up and down arrow keys so I can see it in my brush. And then when I like it and I want to lock it in, you can press Return or Enter if you'd like. That will end up locking this in. Or just click your mouse button to apply it, and it will end up using that setting. When I'm done, I set this back to 100. There's a whole bunch of things that the clone source panel can do. I just find that most people don't know it exists if you ever need to scale or rotate things, because most people I find usually resort to having to select, copy to a new layer, use free transform and things aren't always convenient to do it that way. So in this case, I just wanted to show you this thing called the clone source panel. You won't probably find it on your screen right away, so you'll have to go to the window menu, and that's where you'll get to clone source.
Under what tab?
Under the window menu, it's just called clone source. Pretty much any of these panels that I open, if it looks like this, a little panel you could move around, will be found under the window menu. So if you need to use the layers panel and it's not there, go to the window menu. You'll find it. You need to use anything. So what questions do we have about the clone source panel, and possibly about the individual tools we've been using, although there's more we can do. It's just wondering question-wise.
We have a question. When retouching, what's the difference between using an empty layer and doing it on a background copy?
Well, a background copy, first off, what they're saying is, what's the difference between having an empty layer sitting above that you put your retouching on, or duplicating this layer completely and doing the retouching on the duplicate. And therefore, you're maintaining the original in case you screw something up. Well, first off, duplicating the original, you just doubled your file size, okay? Because we have 2 pictures now instead of 1. That's not necessarily a huge deal because hard drives don't cost that much these days, but file size went up a lot more. The other thing is, for me to see where I've done any retouching, I would have to, like let's say I retouch something out. I would have to turn off the eyeball on this layer, off and on, to see what's changing in my image. Where's the change? And sometimes the retouching is subtle, so you can't easily tell where is it by just turning the eyeball on and off. Whereas, if I had done that on an empty layer, I can easily see where the retouching is just by turning off the original layer underneath. You'll see every single retouch speck anywhere in your picture. It's easier to locate where you've performed retouching, because if I just turn off the bottom, the base image, I'm going to see blotches all over where the retouching has been performed. If I open a real finished retouched image, you'll see that a little better. Here, I'm going to turn off the layer that's underneath. Do you see where all my retouching is? Easy to locate. My file size is the smallest that it can be because there's nothing extra in there to bloat my file size. And if I want to remove any part of this, I don't suddenly have a hole in that layer where now retouching tools might not work on there. Whereas if it was a duplicate and I wanted to bring it back to the original version, it's a little more complicated. So that's the thing. I should mention, though, that certain retouching tools can work a little bit faster if you work on a duplicate layer instead. There's a little less calculating happening. So there is one advantage when it comes to that. But in general, I like working on an empty layer because then if I just turn off the layer that's underneath, I can easily see exactly where every piece of retouching is. Other questions?
How many objects can clone source remember?
I think it can remember 5, if I remember correctly. Let me look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so this is something where up here there are 5 icons. Those are 5 different sources. What that means is if I were to tell it that, let's say I was in the normal clone source, or normal clone stamp tool, I came over here and told it I wanted to copy from the top of this area, get on the layer I want to perform my retouching on, and I just option clicked right there to say that's where I want to copy from, and you see it? And I said I wanted to put it over here to make that thing taller. So I click and I apply it. Usually if I were to go now and decide to copy from a different area, it wouldn't remember this relationship here, so I couldn't go back and touch this back up easily. I'd have to re-establish that this is where I want to copy from and this is where I want to put it. But if I do this change once, and before I start working on a different area, I click there, then I can establish something else. I want to take this hole that's here, option click, and I want to put it somewhere else over here. Now that is being remembered as what's known as the second clone source. So let's see what I can do. Well, if I click on the first one, it remembers. I'll turn off this retouching layer and create a new one. It remembers that I was copying from there and wanting to put it here. Do you see how it's still showing up there? It remembers that. If I switch to the second one, it will remember the relationship between those two again. It just remembers I was copying from one area and applying it somewhere else. It remembers that distance that it was moving it. And you can store up to 5 of these. For most people, that is more advanced than you need to get into at the time. But if you're doing overly advanced retouching, if I was completely manually copying these guys out, and to replace the rocks down here, I was copying from right here. And to replace the bushes, I was copying from over here somewhere. I could have it remember all those spots, so I could switch back and forth again and again. And if you have crazy, ridiculous retouching, which I often have, then those are useful. And that's what these 5 things are. So you can switch back and it will remember where you had been cloning from previously. You can have up to 5 of them.